Why is civic education important? Successful democracies depend on the active participation of informed citizens. Civic education aims to inform and empower citizens to fulfill this role. The purpose of civic education is to encourage and empower us to understand our political environment and to actively participate in democratic processes. This is why civic education is also known as democracy education.
Civic education provides us with knowledge. For example, knowledge about our rights and responsibilities as people, and on the roles and functions of government institutions and parliament. This knowledge empowers us to claim our democratic rights, as well as demand good democratic governance from our elected leaders. That means that civic education shows us what we can do to protect and support our democracy. We need to learn about our rights to be able to claim them for our benefit, as well as defend and use them responsibly. A lot of this information is laid out in our country's constitution. And in South Africa, we are fortunate to have a constitution, a set of laws, and a political system that gives a lot of power to the people to participate. The state has to promote the Bill of Rights in order to create awareness of the rights it contains. The Department of Justice and the Human Rights Commission are some of the state institutions which have to promote this type of education.
The overall objective of civic education is to promote active and responsible citizenship. Successful democracies critically depend on active citizens, people like you and me, upholding and claiming our rights.
But active citizenship is not only about having rights. It is also about living up to our democratic responsibilities. For a democracy to function, it is the responsibility of people to monitor the performance of our government and hold political leaders accountable to fulfill their promises and to serve the people.
If we see that things are going wrong, we can mobilize others in our community to raise awareness, change policies, or ensure that proper implementation of policies and the law occurs as it should. While the state is responsible for providing basic services, it is up to the people not to violate the rights of others. Let me give you an example. An essential political right in a democracy is the right to vote. You are not obligated to vote, and you are entitled not to vote. Should you decide not to vote, that does not mean that you lose any other rights. However, it means that you are reducing the total number of the voting population. If only a small proportion of voters vote in an election, this reduces the quality of its democracy. A high turnout of voters in elections is better for democracy because it means our elected leaders have more of an incentive to be responsive and accountable to ordinary people.
We explain the right to vote in more detail in the video, Why Should You Vote? Civic education is about knowledge. Knowledge of what democracy means and how it functions in line with the South African Constitution. And this knowledge is power. If we are aware of the power we hold, then we can use it to our collective benefit. To use another example, if you know about your constitutional right to access to healthcare, you will not easily accept it when you are turned away from a clinic on the grounds that you cannot pay. Civic education will teach you that this is a constitutional right in South Africa and that you have the right to claim emergency medical attention for free. We explain the right to healthcare in more detail in the video. What does the right to healthcare entail? The more knowledge you gain, the more power you have to claim your constitutionally guaranteed rights to improve your life situation. And if many other people do the same, active citizens have the power to change practice or influence political decisions to the benefit of all the people of South Africa.
To summarize, why is civic education so important? Civic education teaches us what we as individuals can do to protect and support our democracy. we come to understand our role and responsibility as active citizens.
Especially since we have only had democracy since 1994, we need civic education to know how we can use this empowering political system to better our and all other South Africans' lives.
Civic education empowers you to change the world around you for the better.
I think each and every one of you who are here have taken the first step in actually the conversations, being part of the process of change, being part of shaping democracy. So really honor you, and we're grateful for each and every one of you deciding to join us today. So as you guys know, the Hans Seidel Foundation's Civic Academy has been hosting these quarterly civic chats, and this is the last one for the year. And the whole idea of civics chats, as you guys would have seen from our posters, is really just to bring together a community. Although it's online, we are a community of civil servants, academics, civic voices, and people who want to learn and become engaged and be part of shaping democracy. We are grateful that you're here. You're here to learn. You're here to teach us. And we're here to have a festival of ideas in shaping our future as a nation. So the first thing I want to say, introduce myself. I'm Mbuso Abantu Madonsela. I'm the co-founder of the Tuli Madonsela Foundation and its managing trustee, and pure evidence that nepotism exists, but sometimes for good reasons. And as a foundation, what we're all about is democracy, literacy, and training, and ensuring that democracy works for all, which is exactly why we wanted to be part of this and why we're so grateful that the Civics Academy and Hans Seidel Foundation decided to make contact with us, as well as, I think it's called Tree Shake. So before we get going, I want us to start off with this whole concept of democracy before I introduce our guests, is that we're here to try and shape democracy. But before we start fine-tuning things, the most important aspect is, do we agree in the end result? What are we trying to achieve? And rather than me finding in my own words, finding a way to establish what it is we want, I think the Constitution does the best. I'm just going to read you the preamble of the Constitution, which states, "We, the people of South Africa, recognize the injustices of our past, honor those who suffered for justice and freedom in our land, respect those who have worked to build and develop our country, and believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. We therefore, through our freely elected representatives, adopt the Constitution as the supreme law of the land." Sorry, it says the supreme law of the Republic, so as to, first, heal the divisions of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. Lay the foundation for a democratic and open society in which government is based on the will of the people and every citizen is equally protected by the law. Improve the quality of life of all citizens and free the potential of each and every person, and build a united and democratic South Africa able to take its rightful place as a sovereign state in the family of nations. May God protect our people. Now, that's the vision. That's where the ship is heading to. And when I read that, to me, it seems there is no way we can rely on one group or the government or one organization to achieve that goal. To me, it sounds like a job for everyone, but that is my opinion. And we have with us 5 panelists who with each of them in their own ways, in different institutions and in different ways, are trying to achieve exactly what is given to us as the ideal in the preamble of the South African Constitution. And so I will introduce each of them more specifically when it is their turn to speak, but rather than me going on about the impressive CVs and the amazing work that they've done for this country, I think you'll be better served by hearing them speak, and you'll have pure evidence as to why they're here, why we need to be listening to their voices, and why they can steer us in the right direction. And so our 5 guests, the first being who's going to be first up is Dr. Nomsa Masuku, who is currently the commissioner of the IEC, and she will be followed by Dr. Patricia Watson, who's the Chief Director for Social Inclusion and Partnership at the Department of Basic Education. And then there is Zolani Zonyane, who amongst his many things here today, he's actually speaking as an active citizen, and he always serves as a prime example of what we can do. He doesn't necessarily do things outside of his position or through his work, but he does things as a South African citizen. And then followed after Zolani Zonyane, we're going to have Usongezi Zibi, who is the co-founder and chairman of the Rivernia Circle and an author. I will tell you a little bit more about his book later. And then he will be followed by the engine for Civics Academy, one of the reasons we're here, who is Ute Lemon, whose exact position is the project manager for Civics Academy. And so the overall, what we're going to be discussing is whose responsibility is it to shape democracy? And whose responsibility is it to be educating us? I think we all agree, the reason we're here is that we all agree that civic education is important and participation is vital for each and every one of us as citizens. We cannot have a functional democracy that is sustainable and serves all of us in terms of like no one left behind. We cannot have that unless we're all holding hands and working together. And here we see we've got government representation, we've got civil society representation, we've got people from different types of institutions coming together to help us answer this question. So I have gone on for far too long. I think I would like to start with our very first speaker, who is Dr. Nomsa Masuku. One of the things about Dr. Nomsa Masuku, before she became the commissioner of the Electoral Commission, she served as the deputy CEO. And this is something that I didn't quite understand or know about when it comes to the IEC. In her function as the deputy CEO, it was strategic development of programs that assist in entrenching constitutional democracy. A lot of us look at the IEC as its only function is to make sure that elections are free and fair, but she held a very high position which goes far beyond that. And a lot of this has been informed by the Electoral Act. So I'm hoping that she will dive in a little more with her current presentation, and what we don't get answers to, we can ask her a little bit more when we have the Q&A session. So if our Civics Academy, if you could please unmute Dr. Nomsa Masuku. And Doc, you have the floor, ma'am. We're looking forward to it.
Thank you very much to you, Program Director, for a very generous introduction. May I just begin with a confession? It was very difficult to figure out where to begin, given the very wide scope that is possible as a starting point. But I think I'm going to latch on to your introduction, where you say that it surprised you a bit to find out what it is that I did before as a commission. So then let me state what I hope is the obvious, that the Electoral Commission is a creature of the Constitution. It is created in Chapter 9 of the Constitution with 5 other state institutions that are independent, that report directly to National Assembly, and whose primary job it is to strengthen constitutional democracy. Now, each one of us have our specializations. The Electoral Commission, as you know, manages elections, all legislative elections in the country. It is also charged with ensuring that those elections are free and fair. It is also charged with the duty to make sure that elections are, that we promote conditions that are free and fair, that are conducive to free and fair elections. It is also charged with promoting knowledge of sound and democratic electoral processes, and undertake and promote research into electoral matters and promote voter education. So if you ask the question about the role of the Electoral Commission with vis-a-vis civics education, usually in the Electoral Commission, you're going to get two answers because there are two schools of thought. The first school says that the job of the Electoral Commission is to run elections, and everything else is a nice to have. The second school of thought says that no, but if you are created in order to entrench constitutional democracy, surely you've got to do more. And that more means that you have to have a permanent capacity, for example, in order to go out into communities and to make sure that people will first of all understand what democracy is and what it is that what their role is as individuals in that whole space in their communities. So what then happens is that in the Electoral Commission, that is really the pull and push. But what we find usually, and I'm going to go right into the area of participation, when people do not participate in the work that we do, because a lot of the time, people reduce democracy and the health of a democracy to the single act of elections, of casting a vote. Unfortunately, that's the minimal thing that you can do in a democracy, to turn up and go and cast your vote. The real work begins after you cast that vote. The test of the pudding is what it is that you do once you have cast that vote. And civic education is very, very useful in order to make sure that people understand what it is that they have to do. So from where we sit as the Electoral Commission, what we see is that, and what our research is telling us, which is commissioned research, is that people are staying away from voting, not because voting is complex, not because the requirements for voting are complex, but because of a general dissatisfaction with the democracy, with the trajectory of the democracy in the country. They are unhappy with the electoral system. They are unhappy with many, many other things. And a lot of the time, they choose to express that unhappiness by staying away. The question then becomes, is it the sole responsibility of the Electoral Commission to turn around the diminishing participation of potential voters? Our answer is we do not believe that to be the case, because ultimately the Electoral Commission may run elections, but it is not on the ballot paper. And we believe that there is a conversation that we need to have about the quality of our politics and what it is that it is doing in order to make people choose to stay away from the ballot box. May I please rest today in my introductory remarks? I am sure I've exceeded seven minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doc. Just listening to how well you articulate things, it gives me, it actually makes sense now how your PhD is in applied linguistics. I could feel it. And funny enough, our next speaker, something that you both share in common, is Dr. Patricia Watson, who also did a PhD in applied linguistics. So before I give her the floor, I think one of the reasons I was so happy to hear that Dr. Patricia Watson would be here is, if I recall, in 2012, she was instrumental in developing one of the programs called Mind the Gap with the Department of Basic Education. And I imagine that program, which is specifically looking at the education system, how to mind the gap where certain students fall behind, and it is making sure that everyone moves together. So they had a specific program focused on that. And I imagine when it comes to democracy, that is exactly what we should be doing. So I look forward to hearing her comments. But Dr. Patricia, before I give you the floor, I must apologize to our guests. We have a few people who've joined us here. I think they might be disgruntled, but they've been sharing the screen and trying to disrupt us. Please forgive us. I know that the team from Civics Academy is curbing them at every opportunity. But if you do see something appear from the screen, it is not our speakers. It is the disgruntled few who are trying to disturb us, but we will continue despite what they do. So please be patient with us, and we are incredibly sorry about that inconvenience. So Dr. Patricia Watson, ma'am, you currently have the floor.
Thank you so much, Chair. And I really want to thank our audience for showing up today to hear us share some of our thoughts about strengthening electoral education in our country. As you all know, civic education is an important part of learning to be a citizen in any country, and in South Africa in particular. And that schools have a really important role to play, because schools, we believe, are at the center of communities. And without them, communities just simply don't resonate to their full potential. And it's also because the child goes to school from a tender age and spends approximately 12 years in the custodianship of educators. And so it's really imperative that each and every school upholds the highest laws of the land. And in our case, in South Africa, the highest law of our land is enshrined in the Constitution and the values it underpins and the vision that is expressed in the preamble. And I was really pleased that when we opened today's session, we gave honor to that preamble, because that is what our democracy is committed to. And when we read it, it's very clear that we are on the same page. When learners recite the preamble to the Constitution, they too share in articulating this vision for our democracy, and they're motivated to know more about their human rights, including their right to vote when they come of age. At the age of 18 years, schools support learners to get their identity documents through the collaboration with the Department of Home Affairs. The idea is a symbol of adulting. It is you use this ID to write your matric, to get a driver's license, to open a bank account, to pay your taxes, and to vote. So young people are really excited to get their ID book because it's really a marker of coming of age. We need to keep in mind, however, that young people are not born with an innate appreciation of their human rights, but rather they learn about these rights in their homes, in their communities, and most importantly, in their classrooms. A key part of our human rights is the right to vote, a right that we should not take lightly, especially since our ancestors were denied this right to vote through the oppressive systems of slavery, colonialism, and apartheid. We should not take this right to vote lightly, because it was only in the 1900s that European women won the right to vote alongside their male counterparts. And African women only got this right in 1994. So when we're quick to scorn voting, we must remember that the struggles of centuries are behind this right. And thus, we should show up and cast our vote in the ballot box at a polling station near where we live. We must know that this act honors all those that struggled for the freedoms and the dignity that we now enjoy, irrespective of our class, our race, or our gender. In 1994, I remember that teachers started to educate communities about what it meant to vote in the first democratic election. It was a very exciting time, full of promise. The vote meant that we were going to rid ourselves of a regime that had oppressed the majority of the population. And so when we were in communities, one of the opening questions we would pose is, so what does this vote mean to you? And I'll always remember a very old woman in one of our groups who spoke up and said, each of our votes are like a very small seed. We plant them, we tend to them, and we wait for the harvest. In other words, when you vote, you plant your seed in the soil of the political party of your choice. You choose your leaders wisely, and you hold them account to deliver access to the services that your democracy has promised. And you help to build a better future for all of us. These wise words have stayed with me, and I hope they will stay with all of you today, because they remind us that when we face voter apathy, for whatever the reason it may be, we must stop and think and ask ourselves, what is at stake if we do not vote? The Department of Basic Education has partnered with the Independent Electoral Commission, and every year we deliver non-partisan voter education in schools. Teachers carry this education forward in their classrooms through the civic education lessons they deliver as part of the life orientation curriculum. We also rely on school communities to demonstrate democratic processes every year through the election of learners to representative councils of learners, what in the olden days would have been called SRCs. And every 3 years, school communities elect parents to serve on school governing bodies. The process of casting your vote in a democratic election means that learners and parents have a say in shaping the quality of leadership in their schools and in their country. We know that by choosing ethical, servant-orientated leaders, we are more likely to improve our lives. So from the perspective of the Department of Basic Education, we call on every student to vote. Just do it. It's the right thing to do. But in order for the learners to appreciate this, we need to remain committed to youth participation, to holding more safe spaces where youth can speak about the elections, about their fears and their hopes, and empower them to make political choices. And it is through the youth's participation that we will sustain the power and awesomeness of what it means to have the right to vote. I thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciated what you said there. One of the key things that I took from your presentation was, the youth in this country are always criticized for lack of participation, particularly when it comes to voting. But one of the things you pointed out is that they do not have this innate appreciation for voting. And one would wonder why, but the reality is a lot of them, if they're Black, their mothers weren't born able to vote. They recently got to vote. And if they're not Black, with white women, although they've been voting since the 1900s, that means their great-grandmothers were not allowed to vote. So it becomes very difficult to think that to have this true appreciation for the democratic process when people that you're in touch with every day weren't born with that. So I appreciate that. And we're going to dive deeper into that when we look at education. Mr. Zolani Zonyane is our next speaker. And when it comes to being a person, a ground force, I've been in very few platforms where he is not there. And this is the man who is what we want to be when we say about active citizenship. This is the person to look to as an example of how to be an active citizen. So I do implore you all to keep your ears open. You will be learning right now. Sir, thank you so much for the work that you do. You have the platform.
Thanks a lot, Wantu, and thanks to also the fellow panelists, and I welcome the participants that we have. I think for me, what I need to address specifically this morning, it stems from the work that I currently do with some of the communities, which is really, from my end, being to ignite the activism within us as communities. But for this particular session, I want to focus on a narrow area of municipal, public, or community participation, which then starts by understanding the fact that if you talk of a municipality, you talk of citizens at the apex. You can't have a municipality without the citizens, without the public representatives, and without the administration. But what is currently happening is the fact that us as citizens and the public reps, we view a municipality as some sort of an entity that exists in the form of land, buildings, assets, the brand, and everything else driven by the administration. We tend to divorce ourselves from that which we call a municipality. What I'm doing currently with some of a couple of stakeholders within the city of Cape Town is more empowering the citizens, but also the public representatives, because out of my experience, it's not only the citizens who do not have knowledge, also the public representatives also lack some sort of knowledge in dealing with what they're expected to do. On the IDP, I think all of us, we know the IDP, we talk about it, but there is a process element to the integrated development planning. There is the actual plan that we get accustomed with. But what's happening at the current moment, we've got a situation where the public participation process is brought at the tail end of this broader process that starts at the beginning of August of each year up to the end of June, which by all means, that's not the right way of doing it. And I went further to check as I was looking at how municipalities are planning to engage with the public, given the current process that municipalities are embarking on. We can see 3 municipalities, prominent metros. Exactly, their planning is aligned with the fact that public participation will be taking place at the very tail end of the planning process, which is not correct. We see only Mangaung that seems to grasp the understanding and the concepts of what public participation should entail, because before drafting the budget, reviewing the IDP, there is a sense that we will interface with the communities. And as I've indicated, bringing it at that end is incorrect. It should start with the planning at the very beginning. What we are currently doing is to look at the current IDP, its current form, with the couple of stakeholders that I'm working with. We are engaging with various stakeholders that form part of the citizens. We are reaching out to the city of Cape Town itself, so that as we deal with this specific word within the city of Cape Town, the process starts here, so that any inputs that are provided, they feed to the budgeting process. Then ultimately, that's where the second public participation will be taking place, which is between April and June. There was also a question to say, what inspires me to do what I do? It is a belief that new futures exist. Without that belief, I would not have been involved in what I'm doing. But secondly, it is the fact that we can create a transformed society as citizens, working with all the various stakeholders that we might be working with. But having requested to highlight challenges, I think challenges have been highlighted in many platforms. They are well documented. I decided to look at the solutions, but in the solutions, just to pick one, that the work or the service that I'm doing down in the Cape Town is to melt the thick steel. I didn't mean this steel, sorry, it must have been public reps and the citizens, which results to frustrations. But again, between the public reps and administrators, that thick steel barrier exists because you have councillors who are unable to engage in councils, unable to engage the administration on issues of importance, leading to the violent protests that we often see, that ultimately give us the fires that we see often. Now, in terms of what really needs to change, and it is about us, for an example, as these citizens that we are, it is about us taking the experience that we have through the professions and vocations that we're involved in to ensure that we find those champions, as Ashraf Gata would say in terms of the champion South Africa. We find those leaders in our communities, we support them. We find those that probably are not already at the fore. As the professionals, as we say, we've got experience, we know what is wrong. It's time for us to fix it, but to fix it, we can't do it alone. We need the participation of everyone who must be involved at a community level. I think for me, I'll stop there as part of my opening 1-2, and then we will take the conversations and many of the questions that will come through as we progress today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Thank you for leading. I mean, the work that you do and even your presentation now actually reminds me of a quote I read in the Daily Maverick that goes, "I am prepared to lead. For there will be no anointed Messiah at any point in the future." And the funny thing is that quote comes from our very next speaker when he was asked about his willingness to step into the political space. That was what he said. He's like, "I'm prepared to lead because we cannot be waiting for a Messiah." And so that's the first introduction for Mr. Zibi, the founder of, co-founder of the Rivonia Circle and the author of a book called The Bestseller Manifesto. So before I give you the space, I'd like to just one comment on your book, Manifesto. In my house, my mother, who's in the room now actually with us, hi, she always used to say to us that, you know, the problem with the youth is that we're very good at complaining about what's not happening. But back in the day, when Karl Marx and Lenin, Karl Marx did not like what was going on, what he did is he sat down with people and he wrote a manifesto. And you're an example of that. You did not sit and complain about what is going on. You wrote your bestseller, The Manifesto. And so Mother would be proud of you. She would tell us that we should be doing what you have done. So we're so grateful to have you here and looking forward to learning more from you. You have the floor, sir.
Thanks very much, Wantu, and good afternoon to everybody. We started in the morning, but it's afternoon now. So I'm going to shape my contribution around the concepts of freedom and democracy. And in that way, explain our approach to civic engagement. We don't call it civic education, we call it civic engagement. We call it political engagement, and how we can use that in order to deepen democratic participation and build a democratic culture in South Africa, because that is what we are trying to do at the Rivonia Circle. We have a view, and myself particularly, that in 1994, we managed to secure political rights and we managed to secure the peace because it was a very violent time at the time. What we did not do was to drive an understanding of this new phase of South African life as being a phase of self-government, where the people determine their own destiny and get an opportunity every 5 years, just about, to review their own decisions and make new decisions about how the country should be governed and which direction the country needs to go over the next 5 years. That is the essence of what we are. Now, the reason we take this approach of civic engagement is because we have an understanding that if you simply do civic education and you talk about the importance of voting and so on, it's unlikely to elicit the kind of response that you need, because democracy has to have a meaning. And that meaning is that it has to give meaning to freedom. Freedom from certain oppressions that we have in our society, but also freedom to realize certain possibilities. Freedom from poverty, freedom to prosper, freedom from a fear of crime and feeling unsafe and so on, and freedom to live your full life without feeling threatened. So all of this transition from one thing to the other. And to ensure, to try and drive a message that says, in a democracy, the people are the boss. They have the obligation, the right, and the opportunity to get together within and outside the setting of a political party, to have a political discussion, to make political resolutions, and to pursue those political resolutions in their interactions with full-time political actors, or to make new choices about how they're going to pursue those political choices. I also feel that one of the things we inadvertently do is to pretend that the concept of democracy or democratic action and democratic conversation is somehow removed from the traditional African way of doing things, where there is also a very strong sense of political conversation in the concept of a community or a nation, however you choose to define a community and a nation, making political resolutions, and then the rest of the community subscribing to whatever the rest of the political conversation has been. And so our journey has been one of engaging with South Africans to understand their attitudes towards politics, how they feel about politics, what is not working about politics, and what they would like to change, which goes to a certain particular point, which is, it is in the nature of democracy that people can decide to alter and change the system of politics that they have so that it becomes responsive to their needs. That says little about voting. But if, as Commissioner Masuku had said earlier on, democracy is not just about the act of voting. By filling in the gap between elections with active political engagement, it becomes by default a way of civic engagement, such that when people are called upon to vote after 5 years or every 5 years, the reason that they decide to participate in an election is driven by the substance of the political conversation they have been having in between, and they can make informed political choices, not just about the so-called bread and butter issues, but about the democracy itself. Because democracy itself is a bread and butter issue, because where it fails, the bread and butter issues are definitely not addressed. And so that has been our mission, and it is my hope that we can engage on the basis of how we advance democratic meaning and democratic participation, so that citizens begin to see themselves as bosses who send representatives to representative structures, rather than have those people as leaders who come and address the people. And we believe that if we turn that around in that way, and we found over the last 9 months that there is enormous and visceral appetite for that kind of conversation, we will deepen our democracy and have a population that is engaged at a civic level. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. So I see now it's very well into our very last speaker. Yours is about civic engagement. whereas our next speaker is about civic education. I hear your point about the importance of the actual engagement, but from the perspective, for instance, for us as a foundation, the Thuli Madonsela Foundation, we always think there has to be a balance between the two, that one needs to be educated in order to be engaged. For instance, we've got, I'm sure all of us as South Africans have gotten tired of load shedding, and we hear people telling us that nuclear power plants might be the solution, but I still can't tell you the difference between nuclear fusion and nuclear fission. And therefore, I can't engage in this discourse about is nuclear a solution. And so when we don't have the information, we won't actually be able to have constructive contributions in order to engage. And this is the work of our next speaker, Uta Liman, who is the project head at Civics Academy, project manager. And so before I let you go, I must say the very first time that I had contact from you, all the names said on my Truecaller, Uta Liman, and I thought you were the Uta Liman who is the dean at the UWC. We have another German, Professor Uta Liman, who is on public health. So I thought that was you, but I do understand that you are also soon to be a PhD, since you're doing a PhD candidacy. So soon we will call you Professor Uta Liman, but with a greater focus on civic education. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Mante. I really appreciate the kind introduction. And yes, I get that a lot. There are not so many Uta Lemans around in South Africa. The other one, I believe, is a few years older than me, but yes, thank you. Thank you for leading us through this discussion, Mante, and thank you for everyone for your great input here. Let me start by explaining a little bit more about who Civics Academy actually is and what we do, just to give a bit of background. So we are a non-profit online educational project in South Africa that is actually initiated and run by the German Hans Seidel Foundation. We were launched in 2016 with the support of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and actually Professor Thuli Madonsela was a keynote speaker. And it was a great launch. And the aim of Civics Academy is to provide everyone and anyone with the tools they need to be active and responsible citizens and to engage. So what we do is we offer free video and audio content. We create videos on any topic around civic education, be it democracy, voting, elections in general, governance, local government. And this content is on our website. It's open access. Everybody who's interested in these topics can visit our website and can look at these short educational videos. One of those you've seen at the beginning here of the seminar. And so we actually see Civics Academy more as a resource for every organization or individual to promote civic education and to educate him or herself. And some of the highlights or milestones of our recent work was actually a cooperation with the Department of Higher Education and Training, where we created lecturer guides that are based on our videos to, they were called Facilitating Active Citizenship. And it was particularly aimed at students of TVET colleges, and for the subject of life orientation, where civic education is addressed and plays a role. And these guides were to assist the lecturers in facilitating fun and interactive classes that promote active citizenship and voter education amongst their students. We've trained more than 400 lecturers on how to use these guides, and actually this year as the first year where they have been using the guides and making it more accessible, this topic of democracy and governance and elections, making it more accessible, speaking in the language that students speak. And we've also created an online course on local government it was originally aimed at councillors, but it's actually for everyone who's interested in understanding how local government works. And this course is 11 modules. You watch a video, you answer multiple choice questions, and it gives a deep insight into our municipal structures and functions, and as well the role that people play in interacting on the municipal level. And lastly, This brings us to our collaboration with the IC. We had a very successful training session capacity building session this year, where in collaboration with the IC in preparation for the 2024 national and provincial elections, we had 12 two-day training workshops on different civic education topics, also based on our material for the local electoral project offices in the 9 provinces. And that also gave us, Civics Academy, a huge insight in, what are the issues, what are the challenges that, that people that are promoting civic education are faced within the country. And yeah, it was a huge learning curve for us as well. And we are realizing our content generates an increasing attention at the moment. We receive requests for collaboration and support on a daily basis, and it's a great encouragement, and also shows the need and the raising awareness about civic education in the country. And I must say that we also need to manage expectations. We're a very small initiative, but we're highly motivated and enthusiastic about creating and supporting an active citizenry in this country. We see active citizenry as a combination of knowledge, attitude, skills, and actions, like Zongezo said before, that aim to contribute to building and maintaining a democratic society, which is based on the acceptance of human rights, the rule of law, constitutional values, diversity, and it includes the whole community. And we think there's so much more, as election is a very important, or voting is one of the very important direct means of participation. But there is so much more, especially on a municipal level. And I think one of the persons in the chat has pointed to this aspect, that we need to be educated about where we can engage and where we can participate in order to actually feel empowered to do so, because we can get involved in our local communities and by very simply report something that is not working, like a broken street light. We can attend public meetings, for example, on the drafting of the integrated development plan. We can and we should participate in community meetings, but it can also active citizenship and participatory democracy, can also be educating young people about democratic values and participation. For me, it also means being aware of our environment and taking action to protecting it. But yeah, and I'm repeating myself as I'm coming to the end, in order to be these active citizens and in order to participate and to do something more than just voting, we need civic education, and education that helps us getting the knowledge that we need and develop skills to be active citizens and to shape this democracy. Thank you.
All right. To our speakers, thank you all so much for your contributions. Uta, with one of your contributions, it's going to lead to one of my questions, but in terms of people being engaged, so you can start thinking about it, voter education is prime in getting engaged, because you get to put that cross to establish what you believe. And as an example, I want us to look at, for instance, America. The Supreme Court decides that Roe v. Wade must be overturned, which means abortion rights aren't going to be enshrined in their constitution anymore. Not that they were. So what do the people do? They decide, well, usually in the midterms, whichever party is in power loses many, many seats in the midterm elections. And this year we've seen the people said, no, we need to have our voices heard. So I want you to start thinking about what would that mean for South Africa, where laws are enacted that the people don't necessarily agree with. Do we wait 2 years? Do we wait 5 years for the next election? Just start thinking about that. So for now, guys, what we're going to do is we're now going to have a Q&A. I've been to so many kinds of conversations like this where you have your panel and they ask us to join, but they don't give the room for the people who have joined to be the ones interacting with the panelists. So what I'm going to do, I have questions for each and every one of our panelists based on the things that they've said, but I'm going to limit my questions. So I'm going to give them each just one question. And I want you as the audience to interact with them, engage with them. should I have more questions for them, I guess I have everyone's email addresses, so I will be able to ask them my questions later, which we'll publish on all of our social media pages. But for now, I'm going to ask each and every one of them just one question on the things that they've said as framing this conversation. But before I ask the questions, just so that we understand how things can be done, as the audience, you have two options on how to ask a question. You can either press the reactions button, raise your hand, and then our facilitator from Civics Academy will give you permission to unmute and turn your video on, where you can ask your question directly. Just mention whom you're asking the question to, but if it's a general question, you can open it up and our panelists will decide which one of them wants to answer you. If you're a little shy or don't want to turn on your video to ask, please feel free to ask a question in the chat function. You can send the question directly to me. You can send it to everyone so everyone understands what you want to know. Or you can send it directly to one of the panelists, and then they will let us know, I've received this question, and they can answer it. So now that we know how things should function, first question that I want to ask is actually going directly to our first speaker, Dr. Masuku. The IEC gets its mandate from the Constitution. I think it's Section 190. But since then, we've had the Electoral Commissions Act, and then afterwards we had the Political Party Funding Act, but we also had the Electoral Act of 98. So this is what has expanded what you're supposed to be doing. I, as a citizen, I didn't know about some of the projects that you're doing. For instance, your partnership that you currently have with the Department of Basic Education, or the training work that you did in partnership with the Civics Academy. We don't get to hear this information, and many people don't even know that the IEC does more than just elections. So what do you think the problem is there? Is it lack of marketing, what you're doing? What's the big issue? And in the work that you're doing in terms of expanding from just having to make sure elections are free and fair, in the work that you're doing, do you guys think you're succeeding, and what are the greatest challenges? So I know it's a double-barrel question, but please help us out here.
Okay, thank you very much. Why is it that people don't know what it is that we do? Let me begin by doing this and saying that we live in an information age. There is a lot of information, and there's a lot of competition for people's mind spaces and their time. And there's so many things that are interesting that you've got to compete with. One of the limiting things is that the Electoral Commission is seen as an events manager. So it manages elections, it declares a result, and there you go. Even at the level of our own families, we get asked, so why are you so busy? It's between elections. Why are you so busy? So part of it is, I think you are right to put the blame on the Electoral Commission itself for an inability to stay in the top of mind, in the psyche of the nation outside of elections. What we tend to do between elections is that we rely on our collaborations. We work it sounds not okay to say that we try to activate civil society, because civil society does not need the Electoral Commission to tell it what it is that it should do. It does it in any case, but it is being effective in making those connections with civil society and using what it is that is our asset base that civil society can use in order to do their work. So that takes up a lot of our time. You ask, what is it that we're successful in doing? What we're successful in doing is running elections and declaring them as free and fair. What it is that we are successful in doing is making sure that that our decision making is transparent. What we're not doing very well is that we seem not to be succeeding in persuading anyone that education, whether you call it democracy education, whether you call it civic education, or you call it civic engagement, is worth funding, because I don't think people are born Democrats. So it is something that you've got to teach, and it can't just be the Department of Education. Whilst the Department of Basic Education has a huge role to play, I think that it is something that we are just failing to do over and over again, to fund this properly, to make sure that it is visible, to make sure that people don't say that the Electoral Commission, for example, is doing the work that it is doing with civic education because there's an election in 2024, which is not the case. The case is that the Electoral Commission has to build a capacity that is fit for purpose, that is able to anchor the resources in communities so that they can leverage what it is that the Electoral Commission has in order to make sure that people understand that democracy requires them to play a role. I think the way that we sold democracy was that democracy was going to do something for you. I think that is a limiting thought. I'm going to stop there before I want to colonize your entire conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. So before I move on to the next question, I have something I would like you to start considering for your closing remarks based on what you've said. Since we as the citizens are not engaged, what could we as individual citizens, civil society organizations, NGOs, what assistance could we be giving the IEC to achieve the goals that you're looking for? What are the kind of things you could ask us each, guys, this is what we need you to be doing, what would that be? And then before I move on to my next question, I want to just commend the IEC. I think people take for granted the institution that we have. Look at the most powerful and the biggest democracy in the world, the first one, which would be America. When they had their last national elections, there was these rampant voter fraud, ballots didn't do this, all of these accusations, and it led to what they call that whole January 6th riot where people went and stormed the Capitol. That doesn't happen here in South Africa, and it's not by accident. It is actually due to a large part of the work that is done by the IEC. We have great confidence in this institution, and it really does a wonderful job. And I think sometimes we only publicize the things that are going wrong, but we forget that when the IEC says this party got X amount of votes, I, as a citizen, trust it. And given the political parties never having to fight, that means even the political parties understand that when the IEC says this is how it is, it really is. And you can never look down on what that means for us. That amount of trust that we have in this institution shows that the institution has been doing wonderful work. So we thank you for that. So my next question is actually going to be for Dr. Watson. And the reason I'm asking is that the very first person to ask a question while she was still speaking was Jenica, and she actually is asking the exact same question that I wanted to ask. I'm going to read out Jenica's question for you, which says, Dr. Watson, in your view, what are some of the impediments that confront the Department of Education to effectively conduct civic and voter education? It appears that the youth in particular is not sufficiently capacitated on the importance of voting. I'm wondering whether schools are doing enough to lay proper foundation to do its part in creating responsible citizens. I agree with the question. So my question was phased a little differently. In doing research, I found that in 2020, the last election, we had 80,000 people between the ages of 80,000 boys, men between the ages of 18 and 19, which is straight after varsity, registered to vote. And currently 110,000 young women, 18 and 19, are registered to vote, which means in total 200,000 people who have gone through the Department of Basic Education, primary school, high school, As soon as they're done, only 200,000 of them registered to vote. What's going on? As Jenica has asked, what's the impediment? Because we don't seem to be getting enough youth that feel it's important to vote. They're not registering. Can you give us some light as to what you believe is the problem? Over to you, ma'am.
Thanks very much. I think that what we've got here is, I don't know that it's a problem. I think it's about coming of age. And that when you come of age, you really do need a trusted adult by your side. And so my call would be to each and every adult to, for each one to take one. During the struggle, we had a saying, say, each one, teach one. And it worked really well in terms of bridging access to literacy. And I think we're sitting at a moment in our time where voter apathy is probably the lowest we've ever seen as a country. And my call would be for each voting adult to take a first-time voter with them to the election station where they're living. If each of us have that one-on-one conversation with the young person and motivate them to vote through our own conviction of its significance, I think we would turn a tide on these numbers. I think where young people are sitting in households where the interest in voting has fallen, they will follow in the footsteps of the adults around them. So first up, I think that it's each one take one would be my answer. And then I really like the question that has been posed because it allows me to share with the audience more of what the department does than my short 7-minute input allowed. One of the things that we do as the Department of Education is we run a very strong enrichment program for learners to explore their talents outside of the curriculum. And this includes, for example, the Children's Parliament and the junior city councils, where youngsters get an opportunity to understand how government works and to participate in the processes of understanding how to hold councillors to account in particular. And another area of work that we're really proud of is our Pan-African youth debating spaces, because it's in these spaces where young people get to test their ideas, to have their ideas challenged in their peer group. And these types of enrichment activities really rely on young people showing up and participating in them. Some of our flagship work is conducted through 2 leading competitions in the sector. The one is the Nkosi Albert Lutuli Oral History Competition. And this is really where we use history as a lever to understand and appreciate what the past has to offer us and how we respond to our present day based on what we know our ancestors have experienced, and make choices that are informed by history. And then the second area of youth participation is in our schools youth moot court. And it's here where young people get to interact with a pertinent topic and to use constitutional debating to interrogate those topics that stand close to their interests as scholars. And these types of activities really do advance learners' opportunities to participate in their democracy. There's also the DBE TV channel, and I think here the question has prompted me to request any organization, including the Civics Academy, with open source free-to-air content. We could quite easily arrange for the content to reach a wider audience through the DBE TV channel. So colleagues, those are my ideas at first take, but I really think that the challenge of motivating people to vote, and young people in particular, rests with the whole of society. And I'd be fascinated to hear from my other panelists, their ideas in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Doc. I'd also be interested to hear the views of the other panelists, but since I've monopolized the time and I've had 2 of my questions asked, I still have 1 question for each of the other panelists, but in between that, I'm going to give the floor. Guys, in the interest of getting more people to be able to answer, to ask and giving our panelists time, please try and keep your question as concise as possible. If you can do 30 seconds, great. If you can do a minute, that might also work well. And I'll do them in groups of 3. Ask your question. If it is directed to a particular speaker, let us know who it is so they can start preparing. If it is directed to them openly, I will ask our panelists. You'll let me know if you want to tackle it. So here are 3 questions. Civics Academy, if you can unmute the 3, I'm going to give you the order. It's going to be Tava, Maifala, Masebe. And if I mispronounce your name, please, as soon as you start, please give me your name so that I know how to pronounce it in future. Tava, Maifala, Masebe. And then after that, it will be Andre Young. And then after that, Kulegile Msimanga. So you have 30 seconds to a minute. Please be as concise as possible. And thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think the name is Ava. The VH is pronounced. So my question is basically could be asked to anyone, and it would be that are we not concerned that, you know, currently I hear what the IEC is doing in terms of their work in between elections. However, is that do we still have a scenario whereby politicians are still centered around this education of what happens? And obviously that can have, you know, other consequences around that. Basically, I'm asking, is there more civic organizations that can get involved? Thanks.
All right, Andre Young.
Good afternoon, thank you. 1, 2. My question is to Songezo and Nomsa. You know, having been born in the 60s, we took the responsibility for civic education based on the whip that was in our back called apartheid. I get a sense that the lack of motivation in terms of youth to participate and engage might be as a result of the fact that it's become too easy. So my question is as follows. What are we doing to increase the whip on the responsibility for young South Africans to engage, to indeed step into their dignity and to become part of the process of consultation, discussion, and decision, so that this mutual social responsibility that was the history of African tradition might become exponential and adopted again? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Young. And Kulegile Msimanga's hand is up. I suspect this might be Wenzile Msimanga. Have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. It is Wenzile Madonsela. Thank you to everyone for your contributions. I agree with our colleague that just spoke about mass mobilization. I think it has to do a lot with common purpose. I remember having a conversation with Mum Sophie de Bruyn, and she spoke about how they were able, as the Black Sash, to mobilize 20,000 women, and this was without social media, but that mobilization was anchored in common cause, which I believe is a challenge here in South Africa. Why I say this is that I believe there's skepticism around our democracy. We look at the last 2.5 years, especially under the Natural Disaster Act, during COVID, where South Africa became a banana republic and unilateral decisions were made without consultation. When it comes to the IEC, we saw that the kind of force that was used for voting in Zimbabwe, and the IEC was there, but they came back and said it was free and fair, where we know for a fact it wasn't free and fair if people were voting under duress. So I guess what I want to ask is, how do we remove skepticism from democratic participation or civic participation, because I think right now people, especially the youth, are at a point where they say, well, what we say doesn't matter because the government will do what they want to anyways. If you look at our Chapter 9 institutions, if you look at our judiciary, if you look at our SOEs, which fall under government, they do what they want, they corrupt, and the man on the street is still left without shoes. So I think there's a lot of skepticism around how this democracy has been run. And secondly, I believe that we need to find common purpose for mass mobilization and to get people engaged. But the actual question is, how do we remove the skepticism, especially after the COVID pandemic and the way that government conducted itself? Thank you. That's a question to everybody, including Prof. Madonsela.
Thank you so much for that. So we have two questions which are open to the public, but Mr. Young's question was very specific. He asked if Mr. Zebi could answer, and also Dr. Masuku. So based on your readiness, panelists, whoever unmutes, if you want to ask, I see that also Mr. Zebi has already unmuted, which means he will address the first question. And then I would like the other two questions to be answered by whichever one of the panelists feels best equipped. I think Mr. Zolani, I can see him nodding, which means I think he's got an answer. But for now, Mr. Zebi, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. I am muted because the machine told me to. So I think Mr. Young goes to the heart of the issue. The question is, what is today's apartheid? That's what drove people into action. You have to define what that is. That's why I said earlier, asking people to simply vote as a civic duty it does not animate people. It's not visceral. What are you voting for? So let me just share some of the feedback that we get. People complain a lot about lack of accountability in the system that we have. They do. We had a session a couple of weeks ago at the beginning of October. Dr. Masuku was there. Somebody made an example about buying furniture somewhere, and that if your fridge doesn't work, if you buy an appliance, your fridge doesn't work, you take it back, they either refund you or they fix it. But with a vote, they come and they take your vote, and if they don't do what they said they're going to do, there is absolutely no consequence. Now, in clever policy-making language, that's electoral reform. That's electoral reform. Do we have a system that is responsive to the kind of democracy that people want? And the answer is no. So people vote with their feet. We find that they deliberately do not vote as an act of protest. They are not mistaken. They are not ignorant. They are disgruntled. They do not want to vote because this system does not work for them. And therefore, I believe the message that will animate people partly back into voting is to say, go and vote to change the system that you are unhappy with. But we do not want to go there. We want to stay in abstraction because apparently these questions are too complicated for ordinary people, but they are not. That is why they are not voting. That is why young people are not voting. Lastly, the first question that we ask in our Democracy Builder sessions, very first question in each one, what does politics mean to you? People say corruption, fight for positions, ignore arrogance and so on. It's all the negative stuff. That's what politics has come to mean for people. And therefore the question is, how do we use that democratic process to change the system so that it is what people expect? And that is why I said in the beginning, you need to define the apartheid, and increasingly that problem, what I call the apartheid, partly an element of that, is the unaccountability of the political system such as we have it at provincial and national government. You have instances where people say, we don't even want to involve the government. Please don't bring them here. That, in a democracy, that means our system is becoming illegitimate. And so all I'm saying in closing is that let us not have this conversation in abstraction. People don't mobilize without a cause. We can't do that. So we must define the cause so that people have a purpose for fighting. Otherwise, we're all going to fail.
Thank you for that. No, I must agree. Mr. Zonyani, I know you were geared to answer one of the other two questions, but if you have a comment on the answer we've just received, you're welcome to do so.
Thanks, Juan. No, I won't really touch on that because there are a couple of issues that I want to touch on. Starting with the issue of information that you've raised, in as much as in that context, it was to the IEC. It is something that is prevalent. For an example, what I'm currently doing, it comes clear to me that number one, information is there at times, well and good. It's a question of, are you able to access it, which becomes a problem. Is it easy to find, for an example, you want information on something, and I'll give each of us this afternoon an exercise that go to the website of your respective municipalities and check whether you'll be able to access or locate the financial monthly reports that they are supposed to publish in their websites. That's one part of it. Still on information, you are able to get to it. There is an issue of access in terms of data and everything else, because I shift now to the ITP, which often comes as plus 1,000 pages. It's a big document because the policies are there, the budgets, the ITP itself, you name it. For someone who wants to interact with that document, but doesn't have enough data or means to access that document, it becomes a problem. Now you are able to download and open the documents. The information that is in there is not comprehensible to you as an ordinary citizen. That is when I decided to say, given the understanding and the knowledge I have of the system itself, but also on how to access the information, how do I then begin to decode that information for it to be easily usable by the citizens? Because every decisions that we make nowadays are based firstly on data, but that data must be understandable. You can't make a decision if you don't understand it. Similarly with what Andrew was raising in terms of focusing on engaging the young people to participate. I was listening to one of the Rivonia cyclists, Uli Corner, it was yesterday, that as a country, we've got a bulge within that category of young people, and it could be an easy target if we want to get some of the things right. But again, it goes to how do we then activate their participation? How do we make them see what we see as we are sitting here? How do we guide them? How do we then mine the data that they need for them to be able to participate? As I said when I made my opening remarks, as these professionals that we claim to be with professional experience, in my case, in the public service, let's do something for our communities to empower them. Let's do something to show them where to get the information they need for some of the participation and decision-making. And going to the last question that came through in removing skepticism. And again, I want to narrow that one to my opening remarks to say, part of what we do down in the Cape is exactly to break that barrier. Because if you are able to bring together the citizens, be it represented by organize the stakeholders, you are able to bring together the ward committees, councillors, and you name them in one room and start that conversation, make them see how best they can work together. Yes, there is a challenge that we often talk about to say there's a distance between those elected representatives and the citizens. But by bringing them together, I believe from my end, that skepticism will be achieved. It's not going to happen tomorrow, next month. Sometimes when I talk, I often say some of the things that we do like the great work that, for an example, Rivonia Circle and other institutions are doing. Let us not expect to see the benefits even in 5 years. And in my case, I often say, not even in my lifetime. It will take time to change the psyche of people, for them to adapt on what it is that we need to do for us to be able to get to the future that we want to go to. I think let me stop there. Then if I've missed something, then you can just highlight it as well.
No, I think you covered all of the questions, and now Dr. Masuku was asked a question as well. So I'm going to give the floor to Dr. Masuku, and then after that, I'm going to have one short phrase to explain to everyone how the closing remarks will be and the key question for the closing remarks. But before I give the floor to Dr. Masuku, there is going to be a survey sent out on the group chat. Could we please have all of our participants, can you please answer that survey? It does a lot for us in terms of data collection. And at the end of the day, we want a society where all decisions are made on a basis of data. And this is helping us in that process. So please do answer that survey. We will all greatly appreciate that. Dr. Masuku, you have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you very much. In a perfect world, I would have spoken about animation that was mentioned by my fellow panelists. And I would have also spoken about the issue of skepticism, but I won't, because I think they've been covered quite adequately by Zolani. What I do want to talk about is one of the examples, I think, of what is going on in our society. When, for example, statements are made about declaring elections as free and fair. Elections are declared as free and fair according to what the law in South Africa prescribes. And a lot of the time, what we find as the Electoral Commission is that people say that, but you can't declare an election as free and fair because something happened in a locality, and how can you possibly declare the election as free and fair? The fact of the matter is that there is an entire framework that guides the Electoral Commission on which it declares an election as free and fair, and it is that you use. And I thought it is important in this platform to mention that issue, because some of the statements that are thrown around are exactly what contribute to the skepticism. It's exactly what contributes to diminishing trust in institutions like the Electoral Commission, where an isolated incident is used in order to besmirch the reputation of a particular organization, not to delegitimize the things that go wrong, because things do go wrong in election management. But I think that it is important that in our work, we do take the trouble to say, when you are required to declare an election as free and fair, what is it that you are working with? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. All right, so I'm going to now give an opportunity to each of our panelists to give us our closing remarks, but I would also like to add, for those who still have questions, please feel free to tweet them or send them to any one of us, either Civics Academy or the Thuli Madonsela Foundation. We will continue to answer those questions, and we can you can actually still interact with our panelists. If you feel like there's more that you wanted out of them, we will give you that opportunity. I know that they are active on social media platforms. So do feel free to ask those questions online, and we will respond. So to frame the closing remarks, based on everything that has been said, I mean, you've all answered your questions incredibly well on the back of great introductions and what you framing the work that you do. But leaving here, I want your closing remarks. What we'd like from you is, based on this diverse group that is in here, the whole point of this conversation was, how do we shape democracy? and whose responsibility is it to have civic education? So based on the different work that you all do, you can choose which one of those two questions you want to answer. And I would like to just highlight two things, or three things that I would like as part of your answers, is that a lot of us don't know what we don't even know. So when it comes to things like saying there are websites, some don't know that these websites exist. People don't know what does exist, but then they also don't know how to access that type of information if it exists. So what should we be doing about that? And then there are those who just actually don't even have access, because going onto a website requires data, particularly for us in South Africa. Getting information costs money. And when you have very limited resources, when I have to choose between going to the IEC website and I'm a grade 11 student, they might want to go and search something to help them with a math exam. So that kind of thing in terms of access, what should we be doing? And then lastly, when you guys, if each of you could tell us as citizens what we could be doing to support the dreams that each of your institutions have, what is it that you think we should be doing better as citizens? And this order, I'm going to go with Uta first, and then straight from Uta, we'll go back to how you started in terms of your responses. So Uta, can you go first, ma'am?
Thank you very much. Thank you. A lot of questions. I'm going to focus on a few things, but I've also seen that in the chat box, it was asked, what do we do with communities where access to internet, where access to data is very difficult? And it remains a challenge. We know that because we produce video that actually takes quite a lot of data. We're actually looking into the process, and I mean, probably other institutions can do the same, looking into the process of what it would take to make a website data free, so that it allows more people to access it, to download videos, to download material. You spoke about, how do we know about where that these websites exist? That's, the municipal websites, the meetings. How do we know about that? Who's responsible for civic education was another question you addressed one too. And finally, there was actually one of the questions that we asked when we did the training together with the IEC for the electoral project officers. We asked them, who's responsible for civic education? And one of the first answers was the IEC. And then we start unpacking, and we started, well, who else is responsible for civic education in this country? Can it all be shouldered on the IEC? If that is the perception, this is overwhelming, overburdening. It should rather be a collaboration. And then we know answers were like, yes, it needs to be other governmental institutions. There are other Chapter 9 institutions that play an important part when it comes to civic education. The education sector, Department of Basic Education, Department of Higher Education, civil society organizations. And at the very end, after long, finding all the different institutions and actors that should collaborate on this important task of civic education, it came down to, it's each and every one of us. It should start at our home. It should start with the individual person, and it can be simple things. We all can be role models of active citizens, like Zolani said before. If I foster a culture at home of democratic exchange and talking about things, and being a role model of helping the neighbors, picking up litter, addressing broken things, and caring for my environment and for my community, then I'm starting to be a role model of an active citizen, and I'm showing my kids and my grandkids, how simple it is to start somewhere. We've had, I think in the discussion, it often came up, and I think Nomsa spoke about it, what does the system do for us? What does this democracy, this big word, what does it do for us? But I think what we need to understand is that we are all that democracy. We all need to work together from a very early age on. We need to be empowered with education and with skills and with having role models in our lives to work together to make this democracy work and to shape it in the way that we all would like to see it. Final words from myself. Thank you.
Okay. Am I next? I apologize.
Yes,
for the
ma'am.
moment. I
You may
apologize.
continue.
Okay. One of the things that you asked me to address in the closing remarks is what assistance could we as citizens be giving the Electoral Commission? I think the one thing that I would like participants to take away for them is the obvious, that the Electoral Commission is a public institution. And when people encounter treatment that goes contrary to what a public institution ought to be, please contact somebody. Please contact me. Make sure that the Electoral Commission, just as we want to hold political parties to account, it is important to hold the Electoral Commission to account. It is important to call the Electoral Commission to all the corners of South Africa to explain its decision-making process. You don't have to pay for that because you already pay for it using your taxes. So when a lot of the distance that I see is not helpful, either to yourself or to the institution itself, an institution that you pay for with your last cent to sustain, call it. Call us where you are so that we can explain ourselves, we can explain our processes, ask us about the decisions that we make or the decisions that we don't make. You don't have to hear about us. Please do that. That's the assistance that I'm looking for. It is an Electoral Commission that is accessible to every single person, to every single organization, not because you're friends with NAMSA or NAMSA is a person, but simply because it is a public institution. And that is what I would like to leave with you. They say, please share my contact details. I will do so. What do you want me to share? I'll share my email address. Okay, is that all right? Or my cell phone number or something? No, my cell phone number is private.
Email address.
Let me do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. And over to you, Dr. Watson. You have the floor.
Thanks so much. In closing, I'd just like to really appreciate the work of the Civics Academy and the civil society organizations that are constantly championing the issues that are burning in our space. And also to really appreciate the work that the Independent Electoral Commission does with the Department of Basic Education. And I'm looking forward in Democracy Week next year for us to be able to mobilize as many of the IEC officers and their linkages with schools. And in terms of a call out to our community online, I really would like to ask you to own the agency you have as a citizen of our country. Hold small groups with young people, talk about the issues that are burning for them, and help them to navigate what it means to hold government institutions accountable, and also what it means to walk the walk with young people to services to make sure that they're getting their needs met. And please remember that when we go to vote, let's each take with us a new voter so that we know that we are doing our bit in terms of mobilizing the next generation to show up. And then finally, that the basic education sector holds the space for youth activism with the Department of Higher Education, and to really make a call out to our counterparts across the different tertiary institutional spaces for higher learning to also work with the generation to sustain their enthusiasm and commitment to participate in our vibrant democracy. I thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Doctor. Mr. Zonyan, you have the floor, sir. I know you already touched on your closing, but you can give us more.
No, what I'll do for the interest of time, it will be to answer some of the issues that you raised as the parting questions for the closing, but in answering them, I want to make a commitment on the two things that you've raised. One, for any of us, either in this session or those who will be accessing this recording later on, if you happen to need municipal documents, you happen to need municipal data, don't be shy to reach out. I'm on Twitter because that platform has worked well for me. I will be able to assist in that, not only to access the information, as I've indicated. Sometimes it gets hidden, but that's what I say when I talk to other people. That municipal information is hidden. It will be to extract it and whatever information that you need to make it easy for you to understand, for you to be in a position to take whatever decision that needs to be taken. Secondly, or not should citizens do better? And again, Uta mentioned something. In my case, what I do, if there's a service delivery issue in my ward or in my area, I will be the first one who write to the municipality. And again, I've found Twitter to be useful, taking all the relevant handles that will pay attention to this particular issue. What I can do is, where as a citizen you've got that issue within your municipality, it's a service delivery issue, we can work together. I can support you in terms of channeling that which is an issue so that it can receive the attention it deserves. I've done that with a number of ordinary citizens within the city of Joburg, within the city of Tshwane, and also a number of other stakeholders or organized stakeholders in terms of specifically that particular issue. For me, yes, people talk about keyboard activism. It has worked for me because most of the service delivery issues that I've raised with the city of Eguruleni, they get attention. I get responses. It's also how you package the message itself, because on also answering what should we do better as citizens. We've been angry, we've got a right to be angry. But I think it's time to minimize the anger and try to translate it to activities that will begin to address the very social issues, economic issues that we battle with. That will be my parting shot, Chair, and thanks once more.
Thank you so much. And then last, but definitely not least, Sir, Mr. Zivi, you have the floor for your closing remarks.
Thank you very much. My 2 cents worth is just 2 points. That we, as far as possible, try with an open mind to really get to understand why so many South Africans do not vote. It's not just young people, but to listen with an open heart and an open mind, and to listen very intently so that we can understand what the appropriate response needs to be, working through and with the very people that we can see are actively disengaged from the electoral system itself. I think that understanding is really important. Let us hold off on the lecturing and the teaching. Let us ask questions. Let us understand. Let us respect the views of those who feel that the system does not work for them, and let us work with them to understand what kind of what kind of politics they may respond to, because therein lies the secret sauce. If we don't know what that secret sauce is now, we must start by accepting that we don't know and we want to understand. That is the first thing. The second thing is that we must trust the wisdom of the South African people and take seriously the views that we get and convert those into the kind of civic and political conversation that should take place in a democracy about how people can drive the change they want to see in their lives. So what am I saying? Let us become facilitators and not be anxious to teach and to lecture, because in my view, that turns people off. At the heart of this conversation must be our constitution, must be our constitutional values, must be the meaning of freedom, must be the meaning of the rights. And we challenge people to state how they would want their rights to be realized by them as the owners of this democracy, not by some high ups somewhere whom they do not trust any longer. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, you guys make my job so easy. You know, usually as a chair for the conclusion, you have to kind of search for the things that you had hoped that the panelists would have said and put them all together. But I think each of you were really good in sending the right message. So in my closing, all I'd like to say is I'm going to use this opportunity to talk about what's going on in Iran. After the execution of the young woman at 22 for not wearing her hijab properly, the people stood up. And now 14,000 people could possibly be executed after a vote by parliament because they stood up for what they said. We know our right, we know what we want as a society, as a group, and they took the risk of being executed, and now there's a very good chance they would be. Here in South Africa, we don't have that. We are not at the risk of execution, but what we lack sometimes is that the lack of a common vision. I started with the preamble because the preamble is our common vision. It tells us what we all want. But then we have people who are not willing to be active to achieve that. And so that's it for me, is that we need to stick to what is the common vision that we want, and it's there in the Constitution. Our Constitution is well written, and it speaks to all of us, regardless of what some critics may say. It requires each and every one of us deciding that we believe in what is in that Constitution. We believe in the frame, we believe in the world that it wants us to create. And if we do believe in it, then it becomes each and every one of our jobs as individuals to make ourselves available to participate in creating that world. And we can only do that by personally saying that I'm part of South Africa, which means I have to be part of the democratic process, no matter what that may be. And we can only get to where we're going to get to if we want it through collaboration. The same way this group of panelists from government, civil society, we've all come together because we realize that it will take each and every one of us holding hands to get to the place we want to get to. We're all in the same boat. So I want to say thank you. Each and every one of you who came here, particularly the panelists, thank you for taking your time. I know with a lot of you, I know a lot of what you guys do. It takes a lot to come to sit here to be helping. There's financial things you could have been doing which have brought money to your organizations or yourselves personally, but you took your time for us. And to the rest of you as the audience, you've taken time midweek to be part of this, which means that you are passionate about this country, you're passionate about democracy, and you are the right people. You're the people that this country needs, and it doesn't stop here. It requires each and every one of us continuing with this journey and working in collaboration. Us as the Thuli Madonsela Foundation, we have found friends with everyone who's in this room, and we are always available for collaboration with any of you. And so thank you once again. And most of all, we need to thank the organization that has brought us together, the Hans Seidel Foundation, and particularly the arm, the Civics Academy. We appreciate the work that you're doing, and we look forward to continuing a long-lasting relationship with you, both as a citizen and as an organization. So thank you.
Thank you, Wantu, likewise. Thank you, everyone.
Any last comment you'd like to say in goodbye? I will give you the floor to say goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.